Welcome to the entertaining world of ABC Video. A world of exciting programs for you to enjoy and collect. From Australiana to Australian comedy, great sporting events to the great days of steam. A world of entertainment for you to collect now on ABC Video.
Today, Liz?
Yep, Rover. Get up there this afternoon, I reckon.
If it doesn't rain.
I guess the preparation for a trip is half the excitement. And in this case, it's doubly important because this trip, I'm about to go right up the Carpentaria coastline and cut across over to Katherine. Now, my job takes me all over Northern Australia and I see a lot of the country. But I reckon this trip, this part, has got to be one of the most exciting trips you can do in Australia. Out here, you're on your own. You can drive for days without seeing anyone else. Believe it or not, I'm a major in the Australian Army, and I reckon I've got one of the best jobs in the place. Moving right across the top half of Australia, learning how to survive up here, and discovering some of the secrets of bush tucker. I guess I spend about 8 months a year chasing up bush tucker all over Northern Australia. And the idea is, of course, that the Department of Defence, and particularly the Army, have got an interest in this sort of thing. Because if ever we have soldiers out in the paddock, they may need to know it. I get the information by visiting Aboriginal people and Aboriginal communities. And they feed back that local information that I don't have. And in this sort of country, you need all the help you can get. This trip's going to take me right into the remote heart of Aboriginal territory, Arnhem land, crossing the Roper River, heading north to the Coolaton, and then out west to the Bullman Gorge. It's a real relief to arrive at the Roper River, a great place at the end of a long, dusty drive across from the Gulf. It's a perfect spot to take a break and knock up a bit of tucker. What I'm looking for here are the little freshwater mussels. You always find them tucked away underneath these reeds in running water like this. Having said that, you probably won't be able to find one. Yeah, there we go. There's one there. Oop, two. There you go. You can cook them up and boil them up and eat them. When you're poking around waterways like this, you've just got to be careful of crocodiles because they come sneaking up on you. I reckon the best trick is to get what you want and then clear out.
The waterways up here are a terrific source of food. At different times of the year, there's barramundi and salmon and bream. There's also turtle and ducks and geese. So there's plenty to keep the crocs well fed. And a bit left over for me too.
Put this pot in here a couple of hours ago. And what I'm looking for is a thing called K-Rax. And there they are. 1, 2, 3, 4 of them. They're a little freshwater prawn or shrimp. Not bad tucker either. You can get them all through these waterways right the way around Arnhem land. In fact, they're all over Northern Australia when you look at it. Those little fellas, you can boil them up. They're not real little either. You can boil them up. They make a good feed for breakfast. Just put that back in there. All you got to do is bait it up with a dirty old bit of fish or something like that. And they crawl around the bottom, come into the net, and you got them. Just like a prawn, aren't they? Except they've got these two little blue feelers out the front. Check the other pots. This river has got a couple of real characteristics to it. Firstly, it's the southern border of Arnhem land. And secondly, it provides a top feed. Tremendous stuff. Really great. Most Australians don't get across the other side. They can't get into Arnhem land. It's a very remote and very special part of Australia. To get in there, you've got to have one of these permits. Like that. Once I cross over there, I'm leaving my civilization behind.
Arnhem Land is as close as you'll get to Aboriginal tradition. As recently as 50 years ago, these people lived entirely off this land. They had a balanced diet of hundreds of fruits, nuts and vegetables, as well as meat and fish. They don't rely on bush tucker anymore, but their botanical knowledge is still very detailed. And the way they gather their food can often be totally unexpected.
Cut him this part. Where's that boy? You're big now.
What's happening here is we've collected all this bark here off a particular tree. It's called the emu apple tree. The bark contains a sap in it. In other words, it's a bit like soap. And if you pound it up and release that sap, and then drag it through the water, a billabong. It stuns all the fish in the billabong. You can collect them up and then cook them up and eat them. They call it a fish poison, but it's not really a poison because what it does is pollute the water, cuts down the oxygen content within the water, and the fish, because they can't breathe anymore, become unconscious and float belly up on the surface. Get you? Is it? No. Rubbish. Rubbish. Getting bush tucker is never easy. It's hard and dedicated work. But it's also efficient, and it's got to be. It's one of the first things I learnt from Aboriginals. When you're trying to survive, it's critical to use your time and your energy in the most effective way. I could muck around all day here with a hook and a line and go home hungry. This way, you can be sure of a decent feed. Once the bark's been pounded up, the best part of the job is spreading it round the waterhole. So in the midday heat, you can cool off for half an hour or so and just wait for the results.
Well done. Woo!
There you go. That's fishing Arnhem style.
Aboriginal people have taught me a lot. They've been pretty generous with their knowledge, and I'm grateful for that, because I can now see the bush and its full potential in a very different way. There are so many little things that can add up to survival.
You know, it's really amazing that no matter where you find yourself out in the bush, you can always find something that'll help you survive. That's tremendous. Those leaves, those flowers there, they're loaded with pollen. When you dunk them in your brew, they sweeten it up for you. In fact, they're off the melaleuca, the paper bark. And the bark off that tree can help you to start your fire, the tinder it is. And if you're out of tea, well, you can get the leaves themselves, crush them up, boil them up, and they're a bit of a tea substitute. Not much of one, but still they'll do the job. That's where it got its common name from in the first place, tea tree. There was a bloke came through here years ago, Leichhardt, travelled further up the creek that way, and went right through up into Port Essendon. And he used the countryside all the way along his journey, little tricks like this, and got him all the way through up there. Trouble is, a few years later, he went out in the desert country and no one's seen him ever since.
Even today, for most Australians, this can still seem like a hostile place. From here on, I'm on my own on this trip, and travelling through this country is a challenge at the best of times. Dirt roads turn into tracks, and many of them don't appear on the maps. So one false turn can land you in trouble. You certainly wouldn't want to break down out here. I'm now a day's drive into Arnhem Land and heading northeast to the coast, to a place called Waygiver. If you do find yourself in trouble out here, there are three things you've got to start looking for: food, water, and shelter. And Aboriginal people have always known that the most important was fresh water.
This is exactly the country I'm looking for, because those casuarinas there indicate to me somewhere under the sand here we've got to have a bit of fresh water. Back there behind the sand dunes there's a big water table which comes seeping down underground, emptying itself out into the ocean. Here it is. If my hunch is right, this should be fresh water. Just try him out. It's muddy there for a minute. I'll just let him settle for a second. Yep, that's it. You get gallons and gallons of it coming down here. This whole beachfront area here has got this stuff pouring out into the ocean here. You get these casuarinas all the way around the Australian coastline. And they don't always indicate that there is water underground like this. Sometimes you might just get little bits. But around this part of the world, it's a pretty sure sign that you've got a good supply of fresh water. It'll be enough to keep me going for a bit.
Keep pushing further north before the start of the wet season. It's another 10 hours drive to the Walker and then the Coolatong River, where I can set up camp and get some work done before the rains set in.
Of course, when you do an overnight camp, it's nice to do it near a bit of water like that. Can't always do it, but when you can get yourself a bit of water, you grab it. I keep my camps pretty simple. Just a swag, which is nothing more than a bit of canvas and a couple of sheets and a couple of blankets. Maybe a chair, one of these things here, which are commonly referred to in the army as chairs millionaire, because when you sit down in them you feel like a bit of a millionaire at the end of a hard day. And the only other bit of luxury I've got is a mosquito net. And I'll tell you what, in some places up here you need it. Of course, it's not always the mosquitoes that are the main problem around the area. Around this part of the world as well, we've also got buffalo. If they come tromping through your camp in the middle of the night, they can give you a bit of a nasty surprise. There we go. When you set up your camp, you should always make sure there's no ants around the place too. Because that can be a bit of a problem in the middle of the night, particularly if it's raining, because they tend to come around and crawl on top of your bed and roost up with you for the night. I think I'll put my fire over there, out of the wind a bit, so the smoke doesn't blow through my camp.
It's my job to catalogue and analyse all the bush tucker resources around these areas. And there's still an awful lot that we don't know about. Of the countless Australian bush foods, only one, the macadamia nut, has been produced commercially. Our diet today basically comes from the plants and animals that have been brought into the country. then bred and cultivated up to finally produce the food you find in the supermarket. Meanwhile, we've been ignoring some pretty fascinating things out here, right under our noses. When we've analysed bush foods, we've often found that they're richer in vitamins, trace elements and proteins than the food we're eating at home. For example, the billigate plum, which is found up here during the winter months, is the richest known source of vitamin C in the world. But you do have to be careful, because many Australian plants contain toxins. They can even be deadly. That's why I'm doing this work. In the future, army maps of these areas will include photographs and information about local bush tucker. So anyone who's caught in this country should have a better chance of survival. And all of us will know a bit more about what's out here.
Just send one of these into the laboratory and get a nutritional analysis done of him. It's really very amazing when you walk around the scrub country, the bush like this, just what a range of bush tucker you can find. In about an hour, I picked this lot up here. And within this area here, we've got a whole variety. We've got these little figs here that you can eat, as well as these cocky apples. They're called cocky apples because the cockatoos love eating them. We've also got these little hibiscus flowers, which you can peel the petals off and eat. Some that off too, but don't eat it. As well as that, we've got a thing here that's really related to a mango. It's called Buchanania obovata. And these little fruit are popping out now because the wet season's about to break. And they're about to turn brown and then black, and they're superb. They're absolutely sweet and nourishing. And this fella here, this is a little vine that scrambles and climbs all over the countryside with these little tendrils here. And you cut off the terminal bud and boil him up just like a spinach. So there is food here, and you can survive, but you've got to know what you're doing.
What I've seen so far on this trip is just a fraction of the bush tucker that's available across northern Australia. As the seasons change, they bring with them a whole new variety of foods. And it's the same with each new bit of country. I'm about as far north as I can get, and it's time to head west, right across the middle of Arnhem Land. Most Australians will never get to this part of the world, let alone have to worry about surviving out here. But I still think it's important for all of us to have an understanding of it. The early explorers looked at this land with European eyes. They looked for things that they were familiar with, things that weren't here. This country doesn't release its secrets very easily, and we're just starting to scratch the surface. And one of the great things about it is that it keeps on throwing up surprises at you.
This is really very hard to cop. This is a place called Emu Springs, and it's right in the centre of Arnhem Land, and from here on, I'm on my way out. It's a superb little oasis, quite contrasting to the rest of the countryside. Right here, it's safe from crocodiles, but downstream a bit, crocodiles do live down there. In the middle of the day, I can't find a better spot to spend half an hour. You can even get yourself a bit of bush tuck around here as well. This is the thing called the Leichhardt fruit, and it comes off this Leichhardt tree. Inside, you've got this little pulp when he fills out and gets ripe, which has got a slightly bitter taste. But it's not bad, and it's good tucker. They used to call this tree once upon a time Nauclei orientalis, but they reckon that was too much of a mouthful. So they changed the botanical name, and they now call it Sarcophilus coordinatus, and that's a great leap forward, that is. This will be ripe in about a month's time. And I reckon if you came back then, you'd get a tremendous feed off this tree. It's named after Leichhardt, who passed all the way through this whole area. And these trees dot the northern part of Australia all the way around the streamlines. They're great stuff. Well, this is it. This is the other border of Arnhem Land. And I've driven all the way through from one side right the way through to the other. Looking at those storm clouds over there, I might have just done it in time, because that's the beginning of the wet season. And if you get caught in Arnhem Land in the wet, you're there for keeps. I reckon maybe another half day's drive and I'll be on the bitumen. Might be able to get myself a hot shower at the same time. And that's something the poor old Leichhardt wouldn't have been able to do. But some things about this country and this land just don't change. And the wilderness and the beauty and the attraction of the whole place remain exactly the same. And I reckon that's terrific. You know, at no other time of the year could I sit down here and find so many bush tuckers literally within arm's length. We've got that raga there. Over here we've got a fig. That'll be producing fruit in about 2 weeks. Down here we've got a native grape. Just over the back there's a palm there. And just in there we've got that Polynesian arrowroot. A month ago you wouldn't have found half of these fruits because they didn't have the rainfall to punch them up. 2 months ago you would have found none of them except for the palm. And that's the sort of effect that the wet season has on this country. In the top half of Australia, the big rains fall in the summer months, from around January through to April. The monsoon moves in from the north, the drought breaks, and a whole new fantastic cycle of life begins. Up here, we just call it the wet.
This afternoon rain is typical of the wet season. All this water, all the vegetation, all the bird life, the animal life, everything comes to life at this time of year, even though it's a little bit uncomfortable to get around. Talking about comfort, you've got to find yourself a good base camp at this time, and I know exactly where there is one. This is tremendous.
It's a great time of the year for me. This is when my job gets a bit easier. My life revolves around bush tucker, cataloguing it right across Australia, and right now there's plenty of them. Your biggest problem is simply getting around the place. During the wet season, rivers can flood within hours. Sometimes they can stay up for weeks or even months, isolating anyone that's caught on the wrong side. If you do have to get around by vehicle, it's four-wheel drive country only, and you still have to be very careful. One mistake, one slip, and you're faced with an hour or more of digging and winching your way out. I'm trying to get to an old campsite of mine in the Northern Territory. It's southwest of Darwin, in Aboriginal country, between the Darley River and Port Keats, or Waddyeye as it's now called. When Aboriginals travel through this country, they have an uncanny eye for its potential. While we're looking at the scenery, they're thinking survival. Grasses aren't something that just get in the way. All grass seeds can be eaten, some can even be used as medicines. As you'll see, it's simply a matter of using what's around rather than fighting against it.
Well, this is it. This is my wet season camp. I built it 2 years ago, I think, for that exact reason, to escape the wet. It's looking a bit crooked now. Needs a bit of work on it. Got an old tree falling down, a bit of long grass here, but a little bit of effort and come right up again. Pretty flash cam, in fact. Over here I've even got a shower point. It probably wouldn't win too many design awards when you look at it, but it used to work pretty well for me 12 months ago when I used it last time. Looking at it now, though, I reckon I've got a bit of work to do.
The bush provides a lot of the building materials you need for a camp like this. And in these conditions, it regenerates pretty quickly. Out here, you do have to be careful though. Even small cuts can turn into tropical ulcers. And the hospitals are few and far between. But if you're prepared to do without a few of the home comforts, then the isolation can be very appealing. Even in the middle of the wet season, you can still get beautiful, clear, sunny mornings. But whatever the conditions, the best way to do my work is on foot. Because of the rainfall, plant life is no longer restricted to the waterways. It can be found cropping up all over the country. And that means I've got to cover a lot more ground.
One of the real problems of working and walking around wetland areas like this at this time of year are these little fellas here. Leeches. You get them all through this country here. Go on, get out. And you've got to get rid of them because once they lock on, they're a bit hard to remove. I guess if you spend 5 minutes walking around here, you can expect 20 or 30 leeches to be on your legs, so you've got to check yourself out all the time. Anyway, I've got to get going. Just dump that in there for a bit, because I reckon I stand a real good chance of catching a feed. Probably a little perch or something like that. You get lots of them around up here. Just put that there for a bit. When you're around the waterways, it's a good idea to look around the edges, because what you can get is good information on what's growing upstream, because the trees that hang over the water dump their fruit and their berries and their leaves. And by looking at them as they come floating past, you can get a real good idea of what's available. These white berries that are coming down at the moment, they're a thing called syzygium, and they're bush tucker. Somewhere upstream, there's got to be the parent tree. Let's go and see if we can find him.
This is the tree. Syzygium. It had to be here. It had to be beside the water. Otherwise, we wouldn't be finding the fruit downstream. Here they are. All over the ground. These little white fellas. You can eat them. Quite edible. Nice tang to them. Fish eat them as well. In fact, I'll tell you a bit of a secret. This is what I use for bait on that line I put in the water down the way there. But I've got a better use for them than that. I'll collect a few up and take them back. When the sun comes out, the temperature can reach the mid-40s. The whole area, because it's so saturated with water, turns into a real steam bath. Even just walking can sap your energy. The sweat pours off you. Look at this little fella here. All those tassels hanging down like that. This belongs to one of the groups which has got a common name called Polynesian arrowroot. And underneath the ground here, you can get a bulb that you can cook up. But on the top, it's got this little seed pod. All the seeds in it you can eat. Can't eat the bulb like this though, because he's a bit poisonous. You've got to treat him up. He won't be ready for picking for about another month yet. And then you bake him up and boil him up. Then you can eat him. But in the meantime, you can eat these fellas here. I'm going to take some back to the camp. With all this water around the place, it's surprising that a lack of it could be a problem. The body in this heat can lose up to 4 litres a day through perspiration, and it has to be replaced or you're in trouble. The best water to drink is the fresh, clear stuff that at this time of the year literally falls from the sky. Up here you get a tremendous view of the whole countryside, and right now you can see the wet season right in action, because this bank up, this build-up of cloud has been coming all day, and now at 4 o'clock in the afternoon it's about to dump down. What happens is that the cloud formations and the storms and the rain build up in columns. So over there we'll have a dumping of rain, and maybe another one over there and one over there. I think any second we're about to have one here too. And that's what it's like late in the afternoon. But it's great because it's a relief to the whole day. Throughout the day, the mugginess and the heat and the stickiness gets a bit unbearable. But afternoon, this is what happens. And it makes the whole thing worthwhile. Tremendous stuff. Some years the rains will saturate the whole of the top end of Australia, but often it's spasmodic and whole areas will get no relief at all, not a drop, and it remains almost as dry as the desert. Instead of rain out there, you'd be seeing the smoke from bushfires. This year though, the rains have done their job around these parts.
This is an example of one of those bush tuckers that have got a couple of uses. And that makes him pretty special, particularly in this part of the world, because not only can you eat these grapes, and they're absolutely delightful, just like a muscatel. In fact, they're called a native grape. But secondly, you can use them as a bush medicine, because down underneath the ground, you've got the root system. Stuck in me too. And that root system has got a sap in it. That sap was used by Aboriginal people as a cure for death out of bites. I don't know whether it worked or not, and I'm not about to find out. But I reckon it worked, and that's good enough for me. Take these with me. They're beaut. So, if you're prepared to work for it, you can get a varied diet in the bush. High energy and protein. Turns out I didn't get a perch in the end. Ended up with a little bream. That's all right. Just as good, I reckon. Righto. Let's see what we're going to do here. Put that over there. Let's get that bit of grass out of there. And here we've got those syzygiums I picked up off that tree. Pretty good looking ones too. What I'm going to do is squash them up a bit, if I can hold on to them. Like this. And put them in this thing here. Then I'm going to add some hot water. I'm putting hot water in so it'll exude the taste out of the berries, the fruit here. It's got quite a soury, lemony type taste. And I reckon that hot water, what it does is turns it into a bit of a hot lemon drink. I'll just squash it up a bit there. Pour him in. There we go. I can even smell it up here. It's drifting right up. I'll put that mug down there. Now I want to strain that out, so I'll put this grass across the top. That's going to be a strainer. I'll just pour him through like this. There we go. Put that over there. We'll try him out. Beaut. That's not too bad, but you wouldn't want to be chasing up bush tucker out in the bush all the time. Takes you all day to find it. See, the problem is that only some of the tuckers are in season some of the time. And even when you find them on a bush, there's only one or two berries or maybe half a dozen. So you'd spend all your day chasing them up. I've got a job to do as well, so I eat ordinary food. But I supplement it with a bit of bush tucker, maybe a bit of fish here, maybe a bit of barramundi or a mud crab or whatever, and sometimes these berries. You got to get to the berries pretty quick though. Bit of rain, bit of wind, few birds, you miss out. And that's the reason why Aboriginal people had to move and move and move. That's why they were nomadic. But some of these things are really worthwhile. Tomorrow, I'm off down the coast. And by the look of that lightning there, I reckon I'm in for a pretty wet time of it. But right now, I'm going to sit back and watch the show. Travelling west to the coast takes you through these vast areas of wetlands. During the dry season, all the grasses wither and die. The only movement that you'd get then would be the small whirlwinds of dust, the willy-willies. But now it's home to all sorts of species of wildlife, from crocodiles and buffalo, all the way through to countless flocks of beautiful magpie geese. The birds and their eggs are a favourite bush tucker with local Aboriginals. Their ancestors used to climb trees and knock the birds out of the sky with throwing sticks as they flew low overhead. Today, the descendants of those people still hold on to that knowledge about bush food and medicine, and they're the people I rely on. Here on the coast, at Waddi community, the person I come to see is Johnny Chula.
Yeah. Hey, Chula.
How you been?
Very good.
Very good?
You've been good, yeah.
Eh? I haven't seen you for a long time, okay.
You adding to something?
Eh?
Johnny Chula is a really good friend of mine. Although he lives in the town, his tribal lands are up on the coast, just north of here. We'll make a trip up to his mangrove country. He's pretty keen to chase up some of his favourite bush tucker. And wherever Johnny goes, his family goes too. The mangroves are Johnny Chula's favourite place. But the mosquitoes and the mud and the rotting wood are enough to put you right off your tucker. Still, I've got to admit, there's plenty of it in here.
Come on now, young fella. Come on. Oh, you bite me, you. You can't bite me, boy. Too late. You're holding tight for me, eh?
Yeah, I got him. Hold on,
you
tight.
All right, all right.
You're holding tight for me, mate.
Another one? Yeah. That's it, that's it. Yeah.
Yeah. The locals throw these little fellas on the fire
Yeah,
just as they are.
Turn him up, but nail that one.
They're a great meal, and I'd be happy to leave it at that. But hidden in the heart of the mangrove tree is another dainty morsel.
You.
Right the way down.
Oh.
It's the mangrove or teredo worm.
Okay. Hey,
Okay.
give me a
Come on,
look.
yes.
Give me a look.
In fact, it's not really a worm at all. It's a mollusk, which bores its way through the wood. It's been the ruin of many a fine old wooden ship. But there's one way you can get your own back on him.
You want him?
You want him? Right, you are.
It's all right. Hey, big way. Whoa!
Oh, my taka. My taka.
I don't know how come you're so skinny, Johnny.
Come on, let's let go.
A bush tucker trip with Johnny Chula may not be everyone's idea of a bush picnic. But it's friendships like this which keep me coming back to this part of the world. The knowledge that I've been lucky enough to pick up from people like Johnny makes me confident that you could survive and even enjoy the conditions out here for quite a long time. That's if you're prepared to put up with a bit of hardship and be a bit resourceful. If you want to stay perfectly clean and dry and comfortable, then you're better off staying at home. But I reckon that despite all of this, the rewards are tremendous.
I've got myself pretty well squared away here now. I'm going to be pretty comfortable. In fact, I reckon I could see out the wet season. Now that might be a couple of weeks or maybe even a couple of months. When the time comes to leave, I'll be flat out dragging myself away. You know, I get to see a lot of Northern Australia in different places and different areas, all around the traps. But you can never become blasé about it. It simply won't let you.
These fellows here are the amazing honey ant. You can only get them around this desert country in Central Australia. They work by hiding underneath the ground, and these fellows here are the storage factories. These other little blokes on my finger here, they're the workers. They've got to get up on the ground surface, climb up the trees, collect the pollen and the nectar, and then back underground to feed their mates. During the hard times in the desert, these workers come down underground and feed off these larder factories. It's a great system. They're not bad stuff either. Proper sweet one, yeah. For the women of Papunya, the honey ant has special significance. It's a central part of their dreaming, their tradition. And these honey ants tell us a couple of symbolic things about living out here in the desert country. Firstly, they're an excellent example of survival. Like the traditional desert people themselves, they're very well adapted to survive the countless droughts. They also tell us that out here in the desert, you can get good tucker. Papunya's on the fringe of the McDonnell Ranges, the mountains which stretch out to meet the desert to the west of Alice Springs. The arid zone, the desert country, covers almost half of the Australian continent. Some of the most sparsely populated country on Earth. 50 years ago, nomadic Aboriginals lived off this land. It's sometimes hard to imagine that anyone could have lived out here at all.
This is your typical Central Australian desert country. It's typified by all the spinifex here and the stunted mulgas and eucalypts and the acacias and the hakeas, the whole lot. But not all Australian desert is like this. Over towards the east in the Simpson, it's all sand dunes, and over in the west, you tend to get your gibber deserts over there. You look around here now, and you think that because there's patches of green all over the place, it's not doing too bad, but that's not the case. They had a bit of rain around these parts a couple of weeks ago, and the vegetation has reacted to that. Deep down inside, the desert is hurting because it's dry, and they haven't had a wet season here for some years.
Without traditional skills, an outsider would be very lucky to survive out here for more than a few days. Aboriginals had to achieve a fine balance in this environment. Their numbers were carefully regulated by the availability of food and water. And in dry times like this, there's also fierce competition for the food that is available. You learn pretty quickly that the early bird catches the worm.
Here's a really good example of what I'm talking about. This is one of the Capara species. And you can see here the old fruit that the birds got at early this morning, probably about daybreak while I was still in the swag. They're no good. There's plenty of green ones left around the place. Up here, if we're lucky, we might be able to get a ripe one. Yeah, there's one there. Here we go. You can tell he's a Caparis because of the joint in the stem here. And also on this particular species, the ribs that run down the outside of the fruit. I guess if I'm going to get him, I'll have to get up earlier myself. I'll just bust him open and show you what he looks like. There we go. Not bad, the pulp's quite sweet. Seeds are a bit bitter though. I reckon if you left him a couple more days, he'd be right on the mark. But if I did that, the birds would get him. Can't afford to do that when you're trying to survive. There we go, that's a little blue-tongued lizard. In traditional times, fellas like this and goannas and lizards all through the desert country here were used pretty thoroughly for bush tucker. This little bloke, he's pretty harmless. He's just out having a bit of a sunbake. We'll just let him go. Here we go.
In the desert, more than anywhere else, survival depends on finding water. You have to be aware of the signs and constantly on the move. It doesn't rain too often out here, so when you see it, that's where you head for, because the rain brings not only the water, but also food. And there are more permanent water indicators, the tribal road signs of the desert country.
This is an engraving, it's not a painting, and what it depicts, it's the Aboriginal logo or sign for waterhole. Sometimes you get it with one circle or a number of circles, but it's very common right throughout the desert country. These sort of things you'll find popping up, particularly around waterholes. Looking around here, I'd guess that the waterhole will have to be up there in that gorge somewhere. Somewhere over there where they've got those rock figs, because that's also an indicator. There you go. That's the little rock fig. You always find him growing around rocky outcrops and escarpments just like this. And quite often, he's near a waterhole. Yeah, the waterhole down there about 50 feet below me. If we could trace the root system down, we'd follow it going right down through the cracks and the crevices, eventually ending up on ground level down there, sucking up the water. These little fruit here are edible. The birds down there, those little finches flying around the water, eat them all the time. But they're pretty dry, and because of that fact, the birds require that water all the time throughout the day. Aboriginal people had a little trick for those finches. They'd break off a leaf like that, or a few of them, and because the fig has got a very white latex type sap, they'd spread it along the branch. And when the little finches came up and landed on the branch, they'd get stuck to it, couldn't fly away. So the Aboriginals were able to have a feed of finch as well. These things are so dry, I've got to get myself a drink quick smart.
Waterholes play a big part in the legends of the desert people. That's hardly surprising. They were once the key to survival in the desert. They dictated where people could live and how many people could be supported. Today, one of the largest Aboriginal communities out here is at a place called Yuendamu, home for many of the Warlpiri people. The supply of water is no longer so critical. Water for these communities comes from bores sunk deep into the earth. But the tribal elders still attach a deep significance to the location of waterholes in their surrounding country. And for me, it's a constant fascination to find out just how and where you can find water.
Down there.
Yeah?
That's why we know the drinks. The pig mob in
This
there
land belongs to
before,
Darby Jamba Jimba.
long time ago.
He's one of the true characters of the desert country.
Yeah, right, that's Yugis.
What mob that?
Darby grew up on this land. He's part of it. And his knowledge is enviable.
Hot water is somewhere.
Yeah?
At the big hole here. And they get water from here.
Out of this one here, digging down.
Yeah, digging down.
In these conditions, even the most reliable places can turn out dry.
This one here.
Right.
There's probably water deep down here, but there comes a point where it's no longer viable to continue. You'd be using up too much valuable energy.
Might be too dry, this one, I'll put.
Yeah, dry. Probably dry here.
Probably dry, eh?
Yeah,
Nothing.
nothing.
Pretty good in that rock one round here.
Yeah, we got around here.
Darby knows that there must be water out here somewhere, and he'll find it by observing the birds and the insects and following the animal tracks.
You can go on that way now.
Yeah.
Before I first came out into the desert country many years ago, I imagined that a waterhole was a place that you had to swim in.
Rock hole, this one here.
Ah, yeah. All out the
here.
gully there.
What I didn't realise then was just how precious even a tiny bit of water can be out here.
A bit dry.
And to find that, you really have to persevere.
Dry again.
Yeah.
And this one dry too.
Oh, yeah.
It
might be a little bit wet
might a
down there.
little bit here.
Coming down from down there, right?
Yeah, come down there from that place.
You reckon I might dig him out and we'll have a look?
Yeah, you can have a take him off, huh?
All
The
right.
rocks.
Dig him out down there.
Yeah.
Yeah, a little bit in here.
Oh, a little bit here.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Down here.
Yeah.
See him there?
Yeah, I seen him.
Yeah.
Yeah. Little bit water there.
Yeah, a little bit.
Mm.
There's not much chance of a swim in here.
Yes.
It'll be all right.
Yeah, it'll be right.
It'll be working all right.
Yeah.
There you go. I tell you what, it took a bit of finding because we started right over there in the hills, worked our way around here, and finally found it here. Even though you can look in a little catchment area like this and it looks dry, sometimes if you dig down, you can get the water. This stuff down here is pretty dirty. I wouldn't drink it the way it is there now. If I wanted to drink it, I'd have to filter it. And the way to do that is to get something like a shirt sleeve or a trouser leg, tie a knot in the bottom, fill it up with sand and a bit of charcoal, pour the dirty water in the top, and then collect it out the bottom when it's all been filtered. I don't have to drink this water, but it's good to know how to find it.
It's really only about 70 years since Europeans first tried to settle in this part of the country. So Darby remembers the days when the Walpri people used to roam the Tanami Desert up to the north.
The fig tree.
I could listen for hours to his stories about the past.
What about the cave?
That cave there, we camp between a big rain come through, and we camp there.
What have you been eating in that cave there? The kangaroo?
Kangaroo, yes.
Emu?
No.
No?
Not any kangaroo.
Nothing?
And goanna.
Goanna?
Goanna.
Where you get that goanna?
Anyway, it's here.
In the sand country?
Yeah.
All over that way?
Yeah. Afternoon time, they're coming out.
Come got a drink now?
Oh, they're getting like the water.
Heading back to the east from Darby's country, you strike some mountains known as Hart's Range. Behind this range, down to the south, are the sandhills of the Simpson Desert. Hart's Range provides a water catchment sufficient to support a small community and some exotic local bush tucker. This is the rather oddly named bush banana. More like a choco than a banana. It grows on a vine which scrambles over bushes and trees.
We might have a look at a couple of them too,
Yeah.
A cooked midday meal of this local delicacy provides a chance to catch up with some old contacts from the Hart's Range community.
Yeah.
I might tell you that you can also eat these things raw. And before we do that, I'll just cut one open and show you something which is really amazing. A bit tough. Just cut him open like that, a casing. And look at this. Isn't that tremendous? What it is are the seed pods here attached to all this sort of fluff. With a wind like this around, when the
the whole fruit gets a bit old and a bit shriveled up, these things start to break away and get carried away with all the wind like that. But those seeds are edible, just like that. And they've got a taste of almost identical to peas, raw peas. They're beaut stuff. When you get rid of all the seed pod stuff inside, and I'll just dig it out a minute here. There we go. Look at that. You can also eat the case lining. Just cut him out. There's more in there. Crikey. Full of it. Yeah. Eat that case lining as well. But like most vegetables, you can eat them either raw or cooked up.
This is young one. This is young. It's right. Good to eat. Like this. Yeah, just a little bit raw yet.
A little bit raw yet?
Yeah.
Ooh.
That's a cook one.
That's a cooked one?
Yeah.
When they go pop like that?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Hey! From Hart's Range, I'm pushing northwest. It's a couple of days' drive to Larger Manu, and that'll take me right through the middle of the Tanami Desert, out to the west of Tennant Creek. The Tanami is a vast spinifex and mulga desert, which occupies the very heart of the Northern Territory. It's Aboriginal land, but these days virtually no one lives out here. And that means you've really got to be on your guard, because if you get into trouble, you could find yourself caught out here for weeks. Well, it certainly pays to check out your vehicle and your equipment when you're driving around this sort of country. This old jerry can here, the seam's been busted apart. A bit of fatigue, I'd reckon. Can't really blame it. I've carted it halfway around Australia. I suppose I could fix it up by getting a hot screwdriver or something and putting it on that plastic and sealing it back over. But out here you don't have to do that, because we can find, out in the Spinifex country, a natural cure. I'll just tilt him back so I don't lose all my water, because water's pretty important around here. Yeah, that stopped him. What I've got here is a bit of Spinifex resin. It's not really resin. The ants have gathered it together to make an ant's nest out of it. The resin seeps out of the stems and the flowerings of the Spinifex grass out here. They put it together and build their nest up, and it ends up rock hard. You can melt this stuff down and use it like a glue or a putty or something like that. And when it dries out, it's very, very hard, as you can see there. I'll just leave that aside for a minute, because I'm going to have to light a fire to get that melted down. I'll show you a little trick that you can use for lighting fires out in the bush, if you're lucky enough, without matches. You get a bit of Condy's crystals and sugar and mix them together 50-50. You can put him on a rock like that, spread him out a bit, and then using a bit of that cotton wool, you scrape a knife very hard over the top. And maybe, if you're lucky, you can get the two crystals to crush up and react with each other and cause a spark to fly, which hopefully the cotton wool will pick up and ignite. There we go. Right, so he goes.
Just smash up some of this resin now. There we go. Put him into here. Put it on the fire. Let him melt down a bit. Should do. Good idea to have a fire going out in these parts, particularly if you get caught and you're lost. People can see them quite often from miles away. Another good thing to have is one of these things here. It's a signal mirror. They've got an aiming mark in them. They reflect the sunlight straight up into the sky. They're excellent. There we go. That should dry off nice and hard pretty quickly. But I reckon I know where I can get some water to top it up again too. Survival can often depend on a bit of ingenuity. And that can mean making the country work for you in unusual ways. This is the sort of thing I'm looking for. A eucalypt or gum tree. Give you a quick refresher on botany, because what happens is that the gums and all the vegetation around here, they suck up the moisture out of the soil, pump it up through capillary action through the trunk and then the branches, and then disperse it off into the atmosphere. Now, if you can capture that moisture before it goes into the atmosphere, you've got yourself water. Looking around here, you wouldn't reckon that there was any moisture at all in the soil. But the tree doing its work and the fact that it's here, alive and well, tells us there's got to be some there somewhere. So what I'm going to do is put this great big plastic bag over this branch here. Once you've sealed the bag over the branch, it doesn't take long in these hot conditions for the process to start up. From here on, the bag and the sun do all the work for you. All you need to do is get out of the heat and save your energy. With a bit of patience and a few hours wait, you'll soon have some water. May not seem like much, but it could be enough to save your life. Try this out and see if it works. Yep, good as new. The community of Larger Manu is on the northern fringes of the Tanami Desert. And what better way to finish off a desert journey than with a bush tucker trip? In Aboriginal society, it's the women who do the great majority of the food gathering. The men are the hunters. So it's the women that I'm indebted to for most of my knowledge about bush tucker. Today, we're digging for that gourmet food of the desert, the witchetty grub. You find them in the root system of the Acacia kempiana, or witchetty bush, as it's usually called. These women are descendants of the nomadic people who once populated the desert. And they still value these traditional foods more than anything else they eat today. This one?
No.
That one?
Yeah.
Ah, right, there we go.
No.
Hey, look at that. Good one, eh?
When you're talking about bush tucker in Australia, you really can't go without the witchetty grub, because this fella, he's a real classic. Eventually these grubs grow up and turn into a moth. They burrow themselves out of the ground and fly away. So the trick is to dig them up before they get to that stage. There are two ways that you can eat them. Cook them up on the hot coals and eat them cooked, or you can eat them raw. Tell you something, a few years ago, an old fellow way down the south of here told me that there were still a couple of small Aboriginal groups walking around the desert country. And with bush tucker like this, I reckon I can't blame them.
Eaten raw, the witchetty grubs are very rich.
Proper raw, eh?
And when they're cooked, they taste a bit like scrambled eggs.
Uka.
For the Women Larger Manu, a bush tucker trip is a continuing ritual which links them to their country and to their past. And for me, well, it's just great to be part of it.
You want a party? Only him, your top springs the beer.
My mom. Yeah, my mom.
You've been going, all right? For the dance? You reckon they'll be cooked now? Bit of drag out there,
The Kimberley region of northwestern Australia. It's a gigantic sandstone plateau, 6 times the size of Tasmania. Slicing right through the very heart of it all is the vast gorge of the Prince Regent River. Because of the harshness of the land here, very few people have been through here, and some areas remain virtually unexplored. It's a trip that I've been looking forward to for a long time.
Unfortunately for me, the only way I'm going to find Bush Tucker in the Kimberleys is by walking across the countryside. He'll be back in a couple of weeks to pick me up the other end of the Prince Regent Gorge here. At least he tells me he will. He's a mate of mine, so I hope he turns up. But before I go, I've got something very special to show you just behind these sand dunes here. This is it. This is a boab tree. And I guess if anything's the symbol of the Kimberley country, it's got to be this fella here. They dump these nuts throughout the year all over the ground. And they're pretty interesting bits of kit too. Just have a listen. That's the nut inside rattling around. When we analyse this stuff here, we find it's got a pretty high level of vitamin C, ascorbic acid. And then we found after 4 and 5 years, when we analysed nuts again that were that old, that it was still hanging around in pretty good quantities. So basically what you've got here is a food time capsule, and a pretty good one at that. This fella stands alone by itself. A bit grotesque and all the rest of it, but he also is pretty majestic, I reckon. I'll break this open and we'll have a look inside. There we go. Oh, it's a bit mouldy and mangy. That's what you've got. A little bit shriveled up, this fella, at the moment. You split him in half, and you can eat this white pith here. Tastes a bit like dry powdered milk, but it's not too bad. Well, I guess you could live off it. This particular tree is very important, historically. I'll show you on the other side. How about that? HMC Mermaid, 1820. That's 168 years ago. His Majesty's cutter. They put in here out in the bay, careening bay. They had to careen the boat, so they bunged it up there on the beach. I guess the sailors had a bit of spare time and put this in the tree.
Funnily enough, the captain of the Mermaid, a bloke called King, reckoned that these trees were deformed by disease, and he had no idea that these nuts were a good source of food. And that was not an unusual mistake for those days.
Hey, look at that. This is a little bit of bush tucker that's got its own bit of history here in Australia. Back in the days when the sailors back there on that boab tree carved their name on the Mermaid there, this fella wouldn't have been growing here because he was only introduced from Argentina around about 1880. He's a bush passion fruit, passiflora. You pick him off like that when he's ripe, when he's nice and gold like that. Split him open, and all those seeds there, you can eat them raw. Just like passion fruit. Good stuff. Birds like them, and that's why they're scattered all over northern Australia these days. They're very, very common, all over the place.
Of course, King and his men on the Mermaid were charting only the coastline. The interior remained unknown until an explorer called George Gray came up this way, and he landed an expedition right here in this gully. He was attempting to travel overland from here in the Kimberley all the way down to the Swan River, where Perth now stands. With him, he had sheep and ponies and dogs and all sorts of stores. Like most of the whitefellas who came up here, they had no idea how to live off this land. They drove their stock over these barren-looking rocks, and yet there was a bit of a feed right beneath their feet.
These are a little fella called mangrove snail. Well, I'll tell you what, Aboriginal people up here in the Kimberleys call them happy snails. They reckon once you eat them, they make you happy. Little characteristic about them is that they always crawl up out of the water. They're frightened of getting drowned, they tell me. You can boil them up and make a bit of an entree out of them. They're not bad either.
Gray, despite his courage, was no bushman. He never did complete his journey, and he was lucky to escape with his life. I'm going to try much the same sort of route, not to the Swan River, but right into the heart of the Kimberley. But unlike Gray, who tried it in the middle of the wet season, I'm doing it without the added problems of torrential rains, which makes this country virtually impassable. But even after all these years, there's still only one way to get up into the high country. That's not a climb that I'd like to do every day of the week. But the one thing it does do for me is separate me from the saltwater crocodiles. There's no crocodile going to follow me up here. But this high country up here does have its rewards. This has got to be one of the most spectacular sights that I've ever seen in Australia. I've flown around this area before, but I've never been up here on the high country, on the ground itself. And you look back over that basin there, the St George Basin, and I reckon you could fit half a dozen Sydney harbours in there. This whole area is just so mind-blowing at this hour of the day. It's tremendous. You know when you're here that you're the only person within hundreds and hundreds of miles. Back there, we've got all the gorges running off right back into the bowels of the Kimberleys. And one of those gorges, the Prince Regent, which is back over behind that knoll over there, goes right up into the country that I'm now going to go up into. This is absolutely superb to sit up here and look at all this country. Mind-blowing. As George Gray tried to force his way across this country, he kept a journal. In it, he described the area as being ruins of hills composed as they were of huge blocks of red sandstone, confusedly piled together in loose disorder. And I reckon that pretty well sums it up. Gray would have found it very hard going. I don't envy him one little bit. Particularly as he would have had no choice but to go up and down the gullies and the small valleys that crisscross the Kimberley. In these, he would have found the rocks giving way to areas of lush vegetation. And if he'd known what he was looking for, a few surprises. There we go. That's what I'm after. Those tiny little fruit there. Those tiny little fruit are now world famous. I'll tell you how it happened. About 8 or 10 years ago, I was showing these things and we sent them in, had them analysed, and we found that the vitamin C level in one of those little fruits is about the same as eating 10 or 12 oranges. So they now lead the world in ascorbic acid. Again, it's a terminalia.
And there are about 3 or 4 different types around northern Australia that produce this sort of fruit. Of course, that ascorbic acid is very good for coughs and colds and things like that. And if you look very closely on these branches, you'll find some little tiny green ants. And they're growing just over here. Anyone who's walked around northern Australia would have encountered these fellas in the bush sooner or later. I can just get my feet sorted out. Here they are up here, swarming all over this nest, which is built up of the leaves and things like that. Because I'm coming near it, they're getting very, very active. And pretty shortly, if I hang around too long, they'll start to attack me. I think the first white people that I know of that they attacked in Australia was Grey's men when they put ashore up at Hanover Bay. You can see them walking all over the place now, and they've got 2 little nippers on the front that lock in and bite you. Aboriginal people found a use for these fellas. They'd open up the nest, break it open like that, pull out the larvae of the young ants inside, mash it up and chew it. I'm not about to do that because these fellas get terribly, terribly agitated. You can see them all sitting there, standing up on their back legs, ready to attack me as soon as I go near it. But the one thing you can do to them, one at a time, just grab that little fella there, just grab him and bite off the abdomens. And they've got a very sharp, lemony, limey sort of tang. Not a bad thing for a taste. See this tall, skinny-looking turnout here? There's a thing called Terminalia grandiflora. And I only discovered him about 4 or 5 years ago up at Columbaroo. He drops these nuts, not now because it's out of season, but you can still find them scattered around on the ground. I reckon that this thing here produces the best bush tucker I've ever had. He hasn't got a common name, so I can't give him to you. I refer to him as the Columbaroo almond. He's tremendous. I'll just get some rocks and crack him open. No good, rotten. Try again. These things are pretty hard to crack open. But they're really worthwhile if you can get into them. There we go. You see that little tiny almond there? Very, very small. But it is absolutely overpowering in taste. Tremendous stuff. One of my favourites. I reckon if you could cultivate these things up and put them in a packet and sell them in a shop, you do pretty well out of them. They're really good. As well as food and water, you've also got to have shelter to survive in the bush. In this part of the world, that's not a problem at all. Small caves and rocky overhangs litter the countryside and make perfect overnight camps. But if you think you're the first person to pick a spot, then you're probably a few thousand years too late. Look at that. That's not natural. That's been put there. All those grooves have been cut in there. Probably, I'd say, by this sharp-edged rock here. I'd work it up and down, establish the groove, and then use that groove to sharpen up spear points and things like that. It's an excellent rock surface for doing that sort of thing because it's pure sandstone. Pretty interesting stuff. Hey, down here, what have we got?
That's a baler shell. It's obviously been brought up from the coast and probably used for carrying water or something like that. Obviously the Aboriginals did the same trip and journey that I'm doing at the moment. It's had a bit of a break at one stage and they've fixed it up using beeswax or spinifex resin or something like that to stop it leaking. I'll leave him back here. This country's looking its best right at the moment, but the rains are over. And pretty soon, it'll start to dry right out. In a couple of months' time, you'll be hard-pressed to get a feed out of it. Even in the good times, you can't just go around picking tucker off any old bush or tree. You've got to know what you're doing. A lot of the plants are very poisonous and require careful treatment before you eat them. Get it wrong, and you'll end up as bush tucker for the ants.
There's a little baby pandanus growing here. Little spiral-shaped fellow. That's why they call him the screw palm. I guess one day he'll grow up to be like his mother here. But that's not really what I'm interested in. What I'm after is this vine you can see curling its way around the trunk and coming all the way down to the ground. Because it's about to die off. And that thing under the ground is what we call a yam. What I've got to do is clear this ground back because I can find the stem of the vine, and that's it there, running down into the ground there somewhere. So I'll clear all this back, and then we'll start to dig him out. Okay. That tuber should be under there, probably about, oh, maybe that far. I'm going to have to be very careful while I'm digging because if I break it off, I could have trouble tracing the tuber under the deck. That's planted right in amongst the root system here. Ooh, there we go. Oh, that's only a little one. That's probably one of the juveniles from around the area here. They're what you call a cheeky yam. It's pretty small, that one. I think we can do better than that. But they're what you call a cheeky yam. And what that means is that when you eat it without cooking it, it burns the inside of your mouth. So the only way to cook it is to roast it or perhaps boil it the same you would a potato. All this yam digging and that sort of thing is regarded in Aboriginal society as basically women's work. I was out the bush one time with an old fella and we found a yam vine just like this. I said to him, hey, what about we dig this one up? And he said, no, rubbish tucker, that one. Women's work. And walked away. We might do better down here. Ooh. There we go. Stabbed him with a machete, broken in two now. Bit of a dirty looking one too. There it is. You can see that bit of a potato looking thing there. That's what you cook up on the fire or boil it up in the pot and then eat him just like a potato. If I were to dig down there a bit further, I'd probably get half a dozen more of these. Just leave him there for a minute. Just over here, I saw a minute ago something which is rather interesting. Hasn't got that much fruit on him at the moment. In fact, there's one berry sitting there just on its lonesome. This is a thing we call dog's nut. And you can pick him off, just like that, and chew him up. Tastes a bit like apple strudel. But the really interesting thing about this plant is that it's one of the few examples that I know of where pioneers in Northern Australia actually use some of the local natural products. Well, there's another berry there. I'll eat that too while I'm at it. Because this fella here is a bush medicine. And back in the days before they had cupboards full of aspirin and all that sort of thing, I'd dig up the roots of this fella here, boil it up, sip it, and that'd cure their coughs and colds and things. And I guess I've had 2 or 3, maybe a couple more old people in this part of the world tell me about this plant, white fellas. So it obviously worked. Well, they reckon it did anyway. I've never had to use it yet. Maybe one day.
As you move deeper into the Kimberley, the sense of isolation grows. So few people have ever come here that the very solitude has preserved the whole area.
These paintings over here, they're a painting style that's called the Wandjina, and they're very common right throughout the Kimberleys. After Gray had been moving through this country for about 3 months, he found himself at this cave here. And in his journal, which I've got here, he reproduced a lot of the paintings that he saw inside the cave, including that lot up there at the end wall there. Even when Gray was here, they were very old. And I guess today they're showing the signs of wear and starting to fade quite a lot.
The knowledge that the Aboriginals once held about this land is also fading away. When Gray came through here, small tribes were scattered across the country. Now it's virtually uninhabited, and many of the secrets of the bush are probably lost forever. After about 3 months battling his way across the country, Gray gave up and returned back to the coast. He'd travelled only about 60 miles as the crow flies from where he'd started. But it was the lessons learnt from those old explorers that, with the aids of modern technology and maps, have enabled me to do in days what took him months. Mind you, there are times when the absence of technology can be a real joy, particularly when I'm up here on the plateau and the crocodiles are still down below. Most of the creeks and the streams around this part of the plateau take you back to one place, the gorge. And after all this walking through the bush, it's not until you come out here to King's Cascades on the Prince Regent River that the magnitude of the country really hits you. For me, it's nearly the end of the trip, but it's not going to be the last. There's so much to explore here, so much to find. I haven't even seen half of it yet. This is the real country of the Dreamtime, a place which is ruled by the sun and the wind and the rain, and certainly not by us. And it all makes you feel pretty insignificant.
Well, this is it. Almost to the very top of Prince Regent Gorge. And this is the spot where my mate with his helicopter is going to pick me up. I hope he is anyway. There's a little lure, barra lure, that I knocked up from a bit of driftwood way back on the coast at Careening Bay. I reckon while I'm waiting for him, I'll give it a try out and see if it works. Might catch myself a barramundi.